You just gonna set it up. You fly. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. The sun shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Listen, Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Yes, good afternoon, family. Good afternoon. This is Brother Ojegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. I've been away for a couple of weeks. I've been at ALD. I've been a little bit of ill health last week. But don't forget, the Afrocentricity Bookman Show is every Sunday between 4 and 6 p.m. We are currently reading 491 Days, prisoner number 132369. Winnie Madikizela Mandela. So this is the story of when Winnie Mandela, her husband was already in prison for maybe about 6-7 months. Winnie Mandela was locked up for over a year, solitary confinement. So we are reading from the notes. She made secret notes, secret journal notices, and it was smuggled out to her lawyers and people like that. And she forgot about them really herself, and then they were finally released by her lawyer. Said, "You remember all this paperwork?" And these paperwork was released in this book called 491 Days. This is how long she was locked up for. Prisoner number 1323/69. Winnie Madikizela Mandela. So let me just tell you that this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. Glass Are Us, you can get them in Seven Sisters. Their phone number is 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. So you can go to Glass Are Us for all of your glazing needs, all of your glass needs. So glass repairs, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, double glazing, single glazing, putty glazing, mirrors, you name it, yeah? So please go to Glass Are Us. If you mention the Afrocentricity Bookman Show, you will get a 10% discount. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, we're running a little bit late now, really. Winnie Mandela. So I want to start again with chapter 5. I've been away for a few weeks. Let me start with chapter 5 again. We got halfway through chapter 5 last time I was here. So let me start with chapter 5 again. Okay. A little background. Winnie Mandela has been locked in this prison for quite a few months now. She's suffering ill health. She's not eating correctly. She's sleepwalking. She's bleeding. All different problems she's having, kind of, you could say nightmares she's having as well, yeah? She decided she wanted to commit suicide because she's been locked in solitary confinement. But then she came up with a plan that if she makes herself sick, she'll be able to get to a hospital. And in the hospital, she could find out what's happening on the outside world. Because herself and the many other prisoners who are locked up in this prison really didn't know what was going on since they've been locked up. So her plan seemed to work. She got to prison, she got to hospital, and when she came back to her cell, she was able to let the other prisoners know, give an idea what was happening. So, chapter 5 is called the Decision, and this is April 1970. During the second week of April, I just could not take any more solitary confinement. I realized that it may go on for another year before we were charged. There was no sign that we were going to be interrogated again. It suddenly dawned on me that if I took my life, there would be no trial and my colleagues would be safe from the torturous mental agony of solitary confinement. The long and empty hours tore through the inner core of my soul. There were moments when I got so fed up, I hanged my head against the cell wall. Physical pain was intolerable. I decided I would commit suicide, but would do so gradually, so that I should die of natural causes to spare Nelson and the children the pain of knowing that I had taken my life. I thought that there would be no better method of focusing the world attention on the terror of the terrorism act than this. I also wanted to avoid my death being interpreted as an act of cowardice. Hence the decision to make it look like a natural death. I made up my mind that I would first find out what was happening on the outside, try and establish contact with my attorney and my family so that I could have a farewell note for my husband and for my children, which I would smuggle during the last few days of my life. I decided to take the following steps in preparation for my suicide. I remembered that it was possible for EB to communicate with one from the prison hospital. So if I landed myself in a prison hospital, I might find a way of communicating with my attorney. I stopped taking my treatment. If the wardress stood in the cell to see that I took my tablets, I put them under my tongue and spat them into a sanitary bucket as soon as the door was locked. I stopped eating. I drank my black coffee in the morning. It was not sugared at all, and it acted as a stimulant to my weak heart. So the pulse was raised daily. I did not even attempt to sleep. I sat up through the night thinking of the steps that I decided to take. I convinced myself that my own contribution to the struggle of my people was so infinitesimal that at the moment there were too many odds against us in my country for any positive action, and that my death would be a major contribution that would stir up world opinion and touch the conscience of those fellow South Africans who still have conscience, especially the church and the student groups. But I later decided that I would say in my farewell note that I had taken my life to protest the Terrorism Act. I wondered how many of my people had died in prison without anyone knowing, especially those who were arrested during the border clashes between South Africa security forces and our men. I stopped asking for permission to see the doctor. I lost weight rapidly. And when I had my attacks, they lasted longer and longer each time. Towards the last week of April, I noticed that during the attack, certain parts of my body would jerk and twitch, almost epileptic-like. Strangely enough, I felt very happy within myself. I enjoyed the bittersweetness of unjust suffering and was quite excited when I thought of how dramatic my death would be. I was so happy at times I fell asleep, and I hoped that I would not get up in the following day, even if I had not gone as far as the hospital. I did not care anymore. I continued with my plans until the 1st of May, when I was taken to the Comp Hall building for interrogation. The rest of the information as to what took place thereafter is contained in my first notes already submitted. The following, however, was omitted for fear that the notes may be perused as before the wardresses before they were handed to my attorney. Brig Orcamp visited me on my return from the Compol building. He had not seen me for quite a long time. This was the day I screamed at him about our suitcases and the conditions of our detention. He expressed his alarm at my weight loss. It is him who arranged for me to be examined on the 6th of May, and this was the day the doctor recommended urgent hospitalization. On the evening of the 1st of May, Rita spoke to me at night. She said she had never heard me scream before that way. When I spoke to Brigadier Ocamp, I think that they were generally concerned that I might make things worse for them. I explained that I personally thought that this was the only way to deal with Brig, as he completely misunderstands respect. He mistakes it for submission. They all expressed their gratitude when they got their suitcases and realized that the screaming had achieved results after all. During the exercise time, on the 6th of May, I managed to whisper through a peephole of my cell door to number 7 and told her that I was going to the hospital. I told her to tell the others not to worry because I had aggravated my condition deliberately to force the Orcamp group into taking some sort of decision concerning us, even if it was a reinterrogation for the matter. I told her I hoped to bring back some news from the hospital. After the medical examination on the 6th of May, I think the doctor became suspicious that I had not been taking the treatment or that something else had developed other than the heart condition. He withdrew all of the treatment and told the matron, Zeely, that he would not risk giving me any more treatment until I had seen a specialist. He said my condition was too bad. The very first night I spent in hospital, I managed to speak to the prisoners, who was ordered by Brigadier to sleep with me in hospital. Brig Orcamp gave me strict orders that I was not to speak to the said prisoner at all. There had to be someone with me because the doctor said I was very ill. The hospital was cleared of my sick patients and I was locked up alone in hospital. When food was brought, the wardress sat in hospital to see that I ate because I had not eaten for long periods. For so long the stomach was immediately upset. I brought up all the food. The hospital orderly was called and he gave me tablets to stop the vomiting, but I got worse. By the 7th, I had all the latest information about what was going on outside. I was checked daily by the hospital orderly. I continued vomiting and getting weaker. The appointment for the specialist was on the 20th of May. In the meantime, the prison doctor prescribed something else I had not taken before. Some red tablets. I learned the new developments outside, the student protests, the press uproar, etc. I then realized those concerned would soon be forced to issue a statement which might reveal our fate. I saw the statement issued by the Minister of Justice to the effect that we would be charged or released soon, and various statements issued by the Bar Council. Mr. Wenzel, our attorney, Mr. Nkube Maponya, Dr. Nkomo, Bishop Stranglin, etc. I could not wait to be back with my colleagues. All my plans were now changed. I was thrilled at the prospect of facing a trial at last. After seeing all the specialists, As fully described in the notes already submitted, I begged the matron to have me discharged back to the cell. On the 13th or 14th of May, I managed to smuggle a note to my family and attorney. That was when I still had the original plan in my mind. I was very ill at the time. I was discharged on the 10th of June upon my request. That night, I told my colleagues all the latest developments, but I was still too weak to have returned to the cell, hence my readmission on the 15th of June. And now this is chapter 6, and this is called Health. My present state of health. My monthly periods have been continuous this month since the new complication of bronchitis and anemia, and something else I do not know. I saw the long medical term in my file when the Pretoria district surgeon examined me on the 18th. I am feeling very weak, possibly due to too much loss of weight, and the poor appetite has not improved me at all. Although Dr. Morgan had said that antidepressants would improve my appetite, but she did say we should not expect a miracle. It will be a long process and it will be slow. Prison treatment. The heart treatment as it was before my redetention. The original treatment, which was originally prescribed by the specialist last year and subsequently withdrawn and submitted with something else, yellow capsules and 3 other drugs, by the prison doctor, is what I am getting at the moment. Since my admission to the hospital, it is 4 drops that I take every 3 times a day. The ones I know are Inderel, Roach, Mondex, and the 4th one is the psychiatrist's prescription. For the bleeding, I get 2 injections every other day. I usually stop bleeding the day I get the injections and start bleeding again the second day before I get the next injection. I have not had those awful attacks since I've been taking the psychiatrist's treatment. So perhaps I needed a psychiatrist's treatment after all. My defense once said, after reading my portion of the saga, "You have really suffered brain damage. Are you in touch with reality?" I also remember that I could not remember what day of the week it was when Mr. Morgan wanted to know. I got so shocked when the mind just gets completely blank and I can't remember the simplest things, no matter how hard I try to remember sometimes. Events from the 6th of May. On the 6th of May, I was seen by the doctor. I was at that stage taking 8 different drugs, 3 times a day. The blackouts had developed into bouts of semi-unconsciousness, which would last for about 15 minutes. I also suffered from the retention of urine, an unbearable condition, which kept me awake the whole night, no matter how heavily drugged I was. After examining me, the doctor was very shocked. He said my condition was very bad. He ordered that I should be hospitalized urgently. He said all treatment should be stopped until I am seen by the cardiac specialist, Dr. Weiss. I was taken back to the cell. Within half an hour, Brig Orkamp arrived, but admitted to the prison hospital, and that the specialist would come and see me in prison. The prison doctor had said that I should be admitted to the general hospital. I know the problem was the security in a public hospital. In the afternoon of the 6th, I was admitted to the prison hospital, which was cleaned, and I was solitary confined in it. The poor patients were returned to their cells. I got worse in hospital. I could not retain my solids. I brought up all the food except porridge. The senior hospital orderly gave me treatment until the 13th of May, when I refused to take any more treatment because I continued bringing up the food. I demanded to see the doctor, who came the following day. He prescribed the original treatment I took on my arrival in prison, a double dose of Indurel, Roach and 2 other drugs. He told me my appointment to see the specialist was for the 20th of May. The 20th of May, the security branch took me to Dr. Weiss' consulting rooms. I was examined for 2 hours by another specialist, and Dr. Weiss was also present. He told me they had held a conference and decided I should be seen by the other specialists, as 2 opinions are better than 1. After the exhaustive examination, taking of blood specimens, ECG tests, X-rays, and the usual heart tests, the doctors told me his diagnosis was hyperventilation, that the heart was working against me, was working abnormally. It triggers off certain electrons, which result in my breathing abnormally, fast, to such an extent that the required amount of carbon dioxide to maintain the blood was consumed. That there were many cases for this condition, i.e. lack of sleep, lack of calcium, iron, sugar, proteins, but the commonest is acute tension, anxiety, and mental strain. He said only a series of blood tests would reveal the cause, and there was no point in treating the symptoms. He said that he would arrange for a gynecologist in treating the symptoms. And he would arrange for a gynecologist to see me, as my anemia had also set in, and that it was possible, and it was possibly due to the fact that I get my monthly periods twice a month since my detention. He also said arrangements would be made with the prison doctor for me to have sleeping bag into which I would breathe in the same carbon dioxide I inhaled at night. The 26th of May, I was taken to the SBs on the 7th floor of the Pretoria Medical Centre. I have forgotten the name of the doctor, but it is a laboratory. Several blood specimens were taken and urine specimens. The 27th of May, the prison doctor saw me again in hospital. He told me that he had received a cardiac specialist report. It was obvious that my conditions were deteriorating due to acute tension and mental strain. He told me that they have arranged for a psychiatrist to see me, and that I should not worry, as they think I was mad. They merely wanted his opinion. My treatment would be changed when he had received all the reports, and it was also noted that I had lost 18 pounds of weight on the 20th. On the 28th of May, I was taken from the hospital to the matron's office, where I found 2 doctors, a psychiatrist from Westcott. One was a woman doctor, Dr. Morgan, and she is the one who carried out the interview. I have always had trouble distinguishing between the psychiatrist and the mental patient. On this date, I was, however, more convinced than ever that the psychiatrists are really mentally sick people. The absurd questions I was asked were as follows, to mention a few. So let me remind you, this is Brother Jegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman show. Every Sunday between 4 and 6, we are reading at the moment 491 days. Prisoner number 1323/69. Winnie Madikizela Mandela. These are some of the questions that they asked. My assistant and I have come to find out how we can help you solve your problems. Would you like to tell us the nature of your additional problems that seem to have disturbed you so much lately? Reply, yes, certainly. My problems are solitary confinement, and the political ones do not belong in a psychiatrist's diary. In fact, the person who needs your interview is the one who subjects humans to solitary confinement for over a year. The next question. Please bear in mind with us, Mrs. Mandela, we are merely here to help you. We understand how you feel. How old are your children? Where are they? And who looks after them now that you're in here? Reply. I gave the ages. I told them I do not know the rest of the information. As I am cut off from the outside world, I do not communicate with my family, and therefore I do not know where my children are. Question. Do you sometimes feel hallucinatory? And have you ever had any doubts about your mind or thoughts of consulting a psychiatrist in your private life? I laughed. I did not bother myself with replying to this. I just said I was feeling very amused. I told her, however, that I was a schizophrenic. I have a schizophrenic brother, and I happen to know that he suffered from this result of our unhappy childhood. That was, however, a family matter. I do not wish to discuss any further. I was interrogated enough on why I went to visit him in the Sterkomferein without permission. I knew this Dr. Morgan was driving to this point, possibly to find out if there were any more mentally ill members of my family. The most pathetic of all questions was, do you feel you are chosen by God for the role you are playing amongst your people? The leadership role. Do you hear God's voice sometimes telling you to lead your people? I think that asks, it's fun to find out she's schizophrenic, have voices in her head. Reply, Dr. Morgan, I would like to cooperate to you. I would not like to display my temper before you, as you have nothing to do with me being here, unless, of course, you are one of those who voted for the people to lock me up. If you have no more questions to ask, I suggest we put an end to the interview. I deeply resent the indirect insult on my national pride and my husband's. Would you ask Vorster's wife the same question if the situation were reversed? You are quite right, Mrs. Mandela, in feeling the way you do. I am very sorry. I have no intention of upsetting you. It's just that you look so much depressed and strained. My desire is simply to try and find out and assist you. Of course I'm depressed and tense, naturally. How else can I be when I'm subjected to this brutal condition we have been subjected to for a whole year? Dr. Morgan, do not worry about your gross loss of weight. It is natural under circumstances. I will, however, prescribe a antidepressant for you to help you ease the tension. And we shall see you again next week. This was the last I saw of him. Last I saw of this nauseating couple. My information told me of an urgent meeting that Brig Orkamp, the general members of the security branch, had. And all the matrons was held in the psychiatrist immediately after I left the office. All the windows and the doors were closed, and all the prisoners who normally work in the office were ordered off the premises. When she took the tea, she was met at the doors by the matron. Normally she just serves the tea. And she overheard the words, some sort of trial will have to take place urgently if we are to justify. The door closed. She could not recognize the voice. She assumed it was one of the doctors. 20th of June, 1970. The gynecologist called at the prison hospital and I underwent a very painful examination, which lasted approximately an hour. The specimens were taken for further tests to establish the cause of a fortnightly period and anemia. After the examination, the doctor told me he was satisfied with the cause was a mental strain and stress. He also said that he will not submit his report until after the completion of the tests to the Commissioner of Police. On the 10th of June, I was discharged from the hospital and sent back to the cell. Towards the early hours of the following morning, all the symptoms started over again. I asked to see the doctor on the 12th. Brigadier visited me in the cell late in the afternoon with the matron. He told me that the doctor would see me on Monday the 15th. On Sunday the 13th, my condition grew much worse. The senior hospital orderly came to take my temperature and found that I was running a very high temperature. I was ordered back to bed, which was brought to my cell. The temperature got worse. Our cells have no window panes and the draft is terrible during the night. On Monday the 15th, I was readmitted into the prison hospital. On Tuesday the 16th, members of the security branch visited me to take my fingerprints. Brigadier Orkamp later visited me and told me he was going to Robben Island. He granted me permission to write a note to my husband, on condition I wrote nothing political. No date and no address. I wrote a very short note informing Nelson that I was not well. I also wrote that he should arrange with the brigadier to see our attorney or appoint the children's guardian so that the guardians should include the children on his passport to enable them to spend holidays with their family. That the fact that they had never been home since I was detained might have grave psychological effects on them in the long run. They are still too young and need the security of their family. I asked him to treat the matter with an urgency. I also stated that the attorney and the guardians have to administer the Waterford bursary, and certain forms to this effect have to be signed urgently. Brigadier reminded me that I was not to mention the note to anyone else, as he had been stopped from permitting correspondence between us, and he was doing me a special favour. Medical reports. I would like my defence to apply for my medical reports, which have been submitted to the Commissioner of Police. After all, Mr. Levin had furnished me with fully detailed reports each time I saw a doctor. And he had even asked me for these reports. I suggest we ask for these reports from the very first day, dating back to the very first, on the 12th of June, 1969, the first date on which I was seen by the cardiac specialist. I am naturally concerned about the fact that there seems to be a great deal of anxiety about my present state of health on the part of the brig and the prison senior staff. The day he left me for Robben Island, he told me that they are awaiting further instructions from the various specialist reports before I undergo further treatment. Chapter 7, Interrogation. I was taken to Compel building for interrogation. I was interrogated continuously, day and night. I started answering the questions on the 5th day. Several other people whose connection with me was just their visits to my house were reported to be detained by Major Swanopel until such time as I would answer the questions. I was told by Swanopel that these people would be released as soon as I gave satisfactory answers, which were in fact merely confirmation of everything that they knew. May 1970, interrogation. A. On the 1st of May 1970, I was taken to Compel building for the interrogation. Upon arrival, I was taken by Major Swampel's office, taken to Major Swampel's office, where he and Major Ferrara interrogated me. The interrogation went as follows. Major Swampel: I notice you look very cross and you have lost a great deal of weight. What's the matter? Why do you look so unhappy? I have nothing to be happy about. Have you lost a lot of weight? I am not in the habit of answering the obvious. Anyway, you have been brought here for interrogation. We want a lot of details from you about your connections with all the overseas groups, especially about the correspondence you carried on with the Tanzanian crowd. We have discovered that you know far more than you have made us believe. And when we interrogated you, now I am going to ask you a lot of questions, and you must answer them. You kept me awake for 5 days and 6 nights to answer all your questions. In terms of the terrorism act, you took me to court after you satisfied yourself that I had made a satisfactory statement. Otherwise, you would not have stopped interrogating me. I am not answering any more questions. That is where you are making a mistake. What we did then does not matter at all. What we want is new information from you. And you have to answer the questions. And you know we are very patient. Are you going to answer, or on the date of your choice? I have told you already. I am answering no questions, and if you keep answering me the same thing, I am going to keep quiet, and that's all. There is only one place where you and I can talk to one another, and that is in court. Rotten as our country's courts are, they are the only platform, even though the magistrates and the judges are your puppets. My only consolation is that I've got the world on my side, and you are an isolated minority. Go there. Major Ferrara, you seem to have completely forgotten that you are a detainee, and at our disposal at that. Look here, you are detained under the Terrorism Act. I'll bring you a copy to read. Perhaps you do not know that we can interrogate you for as long as we wish. And if you do not want to answer now, we will try again the next year, in 1978. Let me go and get the act and show you what I mean. And then he left the office to fetch the act. You talk of platforms, Winnie. I am only a policeman. I have nothing to do with platforms. I'm only concerned with state security. And as you know, you have made serious allegations about the country's magistrates. And you know I get as much help from them as anyone else, wherever I appear. Excuse me. Winnie. Yes, they give you utter hell. I particularly noticed the hell they gave you on the Lanko case. 2 minutes judgment. At least you should have electrocuted the right man. He suddenly stood up and went back through the window and looked through the window, which is behind his desk, giving me his back, both hands thrust into his pockets. I could see him breathing heavily. I knew he was battling to control his temper. Just then Major Ferrara walked back and said that I could find the Afrikaans copies of the act, and I wanted to know if I could read Afrikaans. I told him I could speak the language of my first oppressors, and that the raw and undeveloped so-called language of the second oppressors was not compulsory in Cape, where I was educated. Major Ferrara was furious with me over this, and he threw the act on the table. They both resumed their seats. So I think she was saying, I can read the language of my first oppressors, which is the British, but not my second oppressors, the Boers. You are simply wasting your time away anyway. You better know right now that you will talk whether you like it or not. No one is here to please you anyway. You are delaying your own case. You will determine when you want to go to trial. We discovered you merely confirmed what we had said, and you told us nothing on your own accord. Brigadier Orkamp told me that you are detained because you violated prison regulations. I have nothing whatsoever to do with you. I respect the Commissioner of Prisons to frame charges against me in any case, not you. And what is Brig Orkamp in this matter? We are merely concerned with interrogating you. And we are going to use certain methods to induce information from you, since your attitude is what it is. You are going to talk against your will for that matter. You can use the Phillips Golding method or the Caleb Maesco method, whatever you please. We can go to the torture room now. I am ready. My defense has my instructions on my prospective inquest. Now, that is a real Willie Mandela talking. Do you know where we are, Major Ferreira? We are back in the 60s, and that's how wild she was. I thought she had outgrown that. We disappointed her then. We knew she was dying to be picked up for 90 days, but we decided not to. And you know what is so bad. She means what she says, and no one can do anything about it. All right, Winnie, we shall try again next week, next month, next year, etc. Won't you give us your nice smile before you go? I kept quiet. Please take her back, Major. It is Friday. Perhaps Fridays are not her best days. Or it is our unlucky day. I stood up, and MS said again, this is Swampool, and by the way, you'll find your lunch cold in prison. What can we buy you for lunch? Don't you need some more cosmetics? We will buy you anything. Just give me a list. I kept quiet. He repeated the above question thrice, with no response from me. He then ordered Major Ferreira and another officer to drive me back to the central prison. Upon our arrival, number 7 was taken. I have no knowledge of any additional evidence against me. I therefore assume that the case will be as before, unless the charges of the new indictment date back to the prior October 1977. 1967. In that event, there will be no new charges of recruiting for military training. There are 2 witnesses who gave evidence in the Rivonia case. This is where Nelson Mandela was the trial, and the Carneson trial, who would give evidence. The charges would then have to date back to 1962 to 1964, when such activities took place. None of the present accused were involved in the activities then. The last batch of 64 recruits were arrested on the way out. None of them revealed my name. Most of them served prison terms, and others were released. They are almost all out now. This is chapter 8, interrogation and other issues. So what we'll do, we'll have a short break now. It's virtually 5 o'clock. We're going to take a short musical break, and I'll be back on the other side. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show, And this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. And that is 0208 800 6663. Go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs. If you mention his show, you'll get a nice 10% discount. Go to Glass Are Us for tabletops, mirrors, double glazing, splashbacks, shower cubicles, any of your glazing needs. Glass Are Us will be able to sort you out, yeah? Glass Are Us are to be trusted because they are very transparent. So this is Brother Jegner. We're going to take a short musical break and we'll be back on the other side. And I'll speak to you then.
His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. The wicked men them running now. The wicked men them running now. Rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain, but now is the no. Rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain, but now is the time for Jah to reign. Yeah, yeah. His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. Coming. He's coming. You better rejoice. Coming. Yeah, yeah. He's coming. You better rejoice. So much love, dollar bills and coins will fade away. Could never make I so proud. Oh yeah, black woman and child. Oh yeah. For you I got so much love. Oh, dollar bills and coins will fade away. They could never make I proud. Allowed, motherland Africa still remains so fine. Empresses and emperors living from in those times. I know you're the first to give birth and took mankind. Now let me say you're the hurt, being Omega's divine. Yeah. Take out to Zion and give thy praise. That's where my covenant will be always. How have you been going through those stages? You've been away for many days. Love, woman and child. Yeah. For you I really have so much love. Dollar bills and coins will fade away. Only you could make I proud. Yeah. Black woman and child. You yeah. For you I really have so much love. Dollar bills and coins will fade away. They never yet make I proud. Who knows who will tread upon your road just to make things great. Oh yeah, you and the children, I see them in front of your face. I say, see them close as you live, increase their faith.
Marcus Garvey don't save him, save the future from AIDS. Oh, 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 natural in nature is the way to your needs. You were born as the one to conceive, now let my joy put away your grief. You want a child as smooth as the breeze. Woman and child, you, yeah, yeah, yeah. For you I'm having so much fun, yeah. All the bills and kinds will fade away. They could never put I down. Hey, 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 look, woman and child, you, yeah, yeah, yeah. For you I have so much love. All the bills and kinds will fade away. They would never make I proud. Alone, who are those standing at your door, dressed in Ethiopian clothes, coming more and more. Oh, what a lovely day. The blessing is so pure. Someone conceive today. Of this I am sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Black woman and child, you, yeah, yeah, yeah. For you have got so much love. Dollar bills and cries will fade away. They never yet make I proud. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, black woman and child, you, yeah, yeah, yeah. For you I have so much love. Dollar bills and cries will fade away. They never yet make I proud. Say it aloud. Camel and Africa still remain so fine. Empresses and emperors living from in those times. I know you're the first to give birth unto mankind. Now let me say you're the earth, queen of big as divine. Oh, 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 take I to Zion, I give I praise. That's where my covenant will be always. How have you been going through those days? Dumping away for many years, yeah.
Oh, baby, do baba do da. Oh, I've got something I'd like to say. It's rather colorful, but I'll say it anyway. Black is our color. Black is our name. Health, strength, prosperity, and wisdom is our game. Those black we are, and black we will always be. Black in the sight of everyone is so beautiful to see. Oh, da da. Baby, yeah. Come on and show me how really black you are, baby. Ooh, baba doo da. Oh. Come at last, black man progressing in every way. Cause black we are, and black we will always be. Black in the sight of everyone is so beautiful to see. Oh now baby, come on and show me how really black you are, oh my darling, oh baby, oh.
Black people may I talk to straight. I want every black person listening to this song to hug yourself and say, we've come a long way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This one is personal. Yeah. Oh, yeah. we overstand, yes, that they're trying all their best to wipe us off the land. Wake up now, take a stand. It's Armageddon. Rebel against partiality. Be proud as Africans, 'cause I hate to see you bleach away the memories. 500 years and more of brutal slavery, while we're leaning on the cross of Calvary. It's wiping out the black majority, literally. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la. I sing 'cause I love you, my people. Listen when I tell you, sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Don't make them kill you. Get up for your rights, stand up for your rights. Did Rosa Parks pave the way just for nothing at all? Mandela went to prison and it was for us all. Marcus Garvey, Martin Luther King, to Malcolm the ball. I think we now go ready till we're back against the wall. Elias Kelly, Andrew Williams Green. Keep on teaching, running African queens. All freedom fighters, past and present, we salute you. Let the blessings of the elders go before you. My people, what is wrong with us? Are we gonna just give in and let them conquer us? Look around, the signs are everywhere. New Orleans to the motherland. We will have to save our nation. Stand strong, yeah. La-la-la-la-la-la. I sing 'cause I love you, my people. Listen when I tell you. Tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Don't make them fool you.
Yes, greetings, families. Brother Jegging back again. That was the great Queen Ifrica singing the song Black People. So this is the Afrocentric, the Bookman show. We are reading 491 days. Prisoner number 1323/69, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. I must remind you this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. Glass Are Us can be found on 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. That is Glass Are Us, 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. Please go to Glass Are Us for all your glazing needs. So glass repairs and double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles. Please mention the show. You'll get a 10% discount. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. So let's continue. Excuse me, just had to cough there. So, chapter 8, interrogation and other issues. So it says here, as a pretext here, after Winnie Mandela's husband was arrested on the 5th of August 1962, and this is Nelson, he was initially held at prison in downtown Johannesburg, known as the Fort, or Number 4. While he was there, he met a prisoner, serving a sentence of fraud. This man, Musa Dinath, was unusually allowed to mix with him and was also occasionally allowed out of prison. He was married to a white woman named Maud Kasnelenborg, or Maud K. Dinath persuaded Nelson that their wives should meet. While they became friends, it later transpired that Maud was not to be trusted. She and her husband introduced Mrs. Mandela to a way her husband could escape from jail. So let's continue. In 1962, when my husband was at the Johannesburg Fort, I visited him regularly. In one of my visits, he told me to go to a certain flat in Twist Street, where I had to meet his friend's wife, Maud K. He also told me about Musa Dinath, who he was sharing the same cell with. What a wonderful person he was, and how well he looked after my husband. He told me not to worry about bringing him food, as there was too much food for Dinaf, who shared it with him. Before I went to the flat, I received a check from Mrs. K as a gift for the children. In a covering letter to the check, she directed me to her flat in case I wanted to visit her. I went to the flat, and this is how I met Maud. We immediately became very good friends. She literally clothed me and my children. One day in November 1962, just after my husband was sentenced, I received a telephone call from an officer who was in charge of the fort. At that stage, I had met Dinaf several times in the company of my husband during my visits. The officer received me in his office. He told me that Dinaf wanted me to convey an urgent message from my husband. Dinaf later came into the office. He told me in a coded language that he had worked out a scheme with the officer in charge of the prison, through which my husband could be smuggled out of prison. The officer wanted a lot of money for this, and he was taking a serious risk. He told me to go and think about this. I reported this matter to some officials in the ANC. A day after this discussion, I received another telephone call from the same officer to report to his office. He told me that the police had decided to transfer my husband on a Saturday that same week, and that I had to act fast. My husband was later brought in. He spoke to me about the same matter in coded language. He said he was leaving everything to me to investigate. I was with him for a few minutes. Dinaf was later brought in. He discussed this with me. He told me that I will be given the details later that same day. Again, I went to the same ANC official who told me the prison officer would meet me on a Saturday night, and I was to hand over to him a deposit, and then a getaway car was to stop at a certain corner. I was to be given a certain sign, which meant my husband had left the prison and was on the way to the getaway car. Then I have to hand over the rest of the money. Excuse me. I was told that my husband was to be provided with the material to saw the bars of his cell, as this was related to a telephone call that came through. The call was for the person I was speaking to. The prison officer was on the phone. He had changed his mind. He wanted all the money in advance before her husband was to be handed over to me. I asked for time to go and think about the matter. He returned later on in the day and was shown all the money he wanted by the officer. I had made my decision then. I explained that I feared it might be a plot to murder my husband, as he might be shot dead after escaping, and the excuse would be he was found trying to escape from custody. I refused to carry out the scheme, and so my husband was transferred to the Pretoria local prison. My mother-in-law's funeral. On the 6th of October, I attended my mother-in-law's funeral in the Transkei. My family and myself were transported to the Transkei by Sikosana, who took us down out of sympathy. I did not have any money to hire a car and was given 4 days. I furnished the chief magistrate and Sikosana's name and address. I got him through to Miss Ndela, who furnished me with his telephone number, which I entered into my little green diary, which was produced in court as having been found by the Major Victor. The following travelled together with me: Telia Maturia, Edna Mandela, Oliver Nomfombo Mandela, Tandola Madikizela, and my 2 daughters. At the funeral, I met number 20. Let me say all these numbers are the names of what they were numbered in prison. Number 7, number 4, yep, their names weren't used. Who approached me with his son. He was covering the funeral for the Daily Dispatch. We discussed the general political situation. He told me that he'd been abroad in the offices of the ANC and also said that he was a bit distressed by the lack of political activities. I told him I would communicate with him. He gave me the address I should use. I met several other people with whom I made similar arrangements. I addressed several meetings at night, both the Matanzima camp and the Diliebo regions were all represented. I left Sikosana with my children at my father's quarters, the Department of Agriculture and Forestry, where they had a royal time. They attended the funeral and returned immediately to the government quarters. Sikosana and my sister-in-law fetched me earlier than we had arranged from my mother's-in-law's place, because my sole daughter, 9 years old then, started performing and rebelling against staying at the government house. She wanted to return to Johannesburg. When the big one joined her in the performance, I drove them back to Joburg and I paid for petrol only. My children had to return to school, which was already opened. We dropped Telia Materia at work. On our way to Orlando police station, where I had to report on my return, my small daughter, my daughter, who is an embarrassing extrovert, said to Sikosana, "Uncle Sikosana, you know my money is going to start running around looking for a car to take us to school. You have a nice big car, won't you take us?" I could not pinch her on time, as I often do, and so Sikosana took them to school the following day after entering them into his travel documents with ease. Again, I paid for petrol. From then, Sikosana became very friendly with my children, and they were very fond of him. And when they were on holiday, he used to take them on drives to Maud, Alexandria, and places unknown to me. Under interrogation, I did not understand then when Swampole and others kept on saying I was ungrateful, and if there was anybody the police had assisted with the transport of my children, it was me. They also said that they will see to it that I paid dearly for this, and there was someone who would not like it at all on Robben Island. One afternoon, without any prior arrangement with Mrs. Costa, I asked Sikosana to drive me and the children to Mrs. Costa's house, which was unknown to me. When we got to the house, we used the back entrance. Sikosana knocked on the kitchen door, which was wide open. An African woman appeared, and Sikosana said in Zulu, "Hello, Grace, how are you? Meet Mrs. Mandela." Grace, who was smiling at first, quickly froze and appeared shocked. She called Sikosana aside, whilst my children and I remained standing outside. After a minute or so, Sikosana came over and to me and whispered that Grace says she will give you anything if you say nothing about her brother's affair. And if you are asked anything by Mrs. Costa, please, for Grace's sake, confirm that her father is banned. I laughed and told him that was not what I had come for, and that Mrs. Grace had her own conscience to worry about. That was none of my business. Grace relaxed again, and after Sikosana had spoken to her, She entered the house with and within a short while she came back, followed by Mrs. Costa. Grace introduced me to her. Sikosana was standing next to me. Mrs. Costa said, "Good Lord, are you really Winnie Mandela?" "Yes, you look like your photograph, but I expected a much older person." "Well, I never." We shook hands and followed her inside the house. She shouted to Grace to give the children cakes and cold drink, and we went into the lounge. She was packing. There were suitcases all over. The curtains were pulled down, and there were some books all over. We sat for a while, and she told me how distressing the whole business of packing was. Sikosana had remained in the kitchen with Grace. I told her how grateful I was for what her husband had done for my people, and that I thought it was the best thing for him to do. Excuse me. She told me how distressing the whole business was of packing. She was very pleased for this, and she said her husband would be very happy to learn that I did not think I had to run away, leaving the ship to sink. She told me her husband had sent her a recording of his flight to amuse the children who were devoted and attached to him. She said she thought I should enjoy some parts of the recording, and so she played the tape for me. Some parts sounded as though he had recorded portions of the BBC programme, and then somewhere there was an interview of an African head of state. It sounded like Nyerere, the first Prime Minister of Tanzania, who expressed his views on the situation in Southern Africa. President Kaunda also spoke. At this stage, Sikosana walked in. I was looking at the books on the big shelf. Mrs. Costa had interrupted the programme and told me to select some books for myself, since she was going away and a large number of books. She was going to giving away a large number of books. I recall President Kaunda saying, "We shall not rest until our thirst for freedom has been quenched in the whole of Africa. The Western powers must choose between Africa and South Africa." Then there was the Zambian slogan repeated twice: "One Zambia, one nation." Mrs. Costa switched the tape off when some Congolese music was playing in between the recordings. Mrs. Costa interrupted and told me when it was her husband's voice. She announced, "We are now flying over so many miles, over Rome. The scene is too beautiful, boys. What are you doing back home, darling?" This is the terrorist recording Sikosana is supposed to have listened to. The fabrication was so shockingly absurd. After this, agents who were selling the house for Mrs. Costa arrived. I had to leave. I chose 6 books. Mrs. Costa said she would give me a lot of clothes to give to the poor. Both the books and the clothes were collected the following day by Sikosana, who brought them to my house. My children played with Mrs. Costa's children in the swimming pool. This was the first and last contact I had with Mrs. Costa's Gazadis. For 2 days and 2 nights, I was interrogated continuously on this. Legal consultation over Dr. Brown. In the meeting held at Mrs. Tassimo's place to discuss the dissolution of Number 7's affair, I made a report of the meeting with Dr. Brown. The general opinion was that it was a police trap, but it was decided that I should seek legal opinion as how we could establish our suspicions, and also to seek advice on the matter raised in our earlier meeting. Dr. Brown called again at the office to make a second appointment. I told him, for his own safety and mine, I suggested that we should meet my lawyer. We should meet my lawyer and produce his credentials to him. A suggestion made by my lawyer, who assumed it was Dr. Brown, was a trap He assumed if Dr. Braun was a trap, he would not have enough courage to meet him. Dr. Braun said he would think about this. The following day, he called me. He was in touch with his superiors, and they agreed that he should meet my attorney, whose name and address I gave him. Dr. Braun had to contact my lawyer directly. I went to tell my lawyer of the developments. Dr. B subsequently made an appointment with Dr. Carlson, with Mr. Carlson. They arranged to meet at a certain hotel. This arrangement was made over the phone. Mr. crossed out did not turn up. Mr. Braun phoned me on the day later. He was furious over the wasted time. He told me that he would contact me again for another appointment. A few days later, a German girl who looked like a student walked into my office. Like Dr. Braun, she said, "You must be Mrs. Mandela. I have a note from you from your doctor friend." I offered her a seat opposite my desk. And Maxi Keka was sitting on the couch. He had visited me about the past problem of his fellow men from the Transkei. I was typing letters from Umata Chief Magistrate and Maxi Keka's friends. This girl produced a letter from her handbag. It was a sealed white envelope. She broke the envelope, took out the letter, and held it for me to read. And before I finished reading it for the second time to observe the content, she folded it. I told her I was not a fast reader. Could she give me a letter to read again? She opened it once more for a few seconds and then closed it. She held it in one hand whilst she took a blank paper from her handbag. I grabbed the letter from her hand. There was a brief struggle as she tried to retain it, and I pushed her onto the chair with one hand. She cried and begged me to return the letter. I told her it was mine, and if she tried to get it once more, she would only have herself to blame. She asked me what would she tell the doctor. I said to tell him that I have received the letter, thank you. She ran out. I took the letter to my attorney. The letter writer wanted an appointment at 12 midnight. 2 days later, Dr. Braun walked into the office, full of smiles, and said, "I notice we shall do very little physical training with you. Congratulations for such caution. I hoped to destroy the letter." I said the letter was destroyed. We made an appointment for the same evening at the USIS. I picked up number 1, who was to keep observation outside Shakespeare's house, and follow Dr. Braun and take the car number plates. Although the appointment was for 8 p.m., I learnt from Mohales he turned up at 7 p.m. On all occasions, he wore dark glasses at night as well. We went to the storeroom again. He took off his glasses on this occasion because he wanted me to trust him. On the previous occasions, he was struggling with the English, but on this day, he was very fluent, although he spoke with a German accent. He produced his identity card, which bore the name, and I noticed an SA citizen. He quickly explained, "You know why I bear South African? You know why I bear? It bears a South African citizen. It is easy to have these things for this country." This day, he said his government does not support violence at this stage, but believes that the Africans should start training within their country on espionage, counter-espionage, intelligence, and some other training. He could not mention at that stage. He personally felt that I was the right person to undergo this training, and thereafter made suggestions of how this would be imparted to the people gradually. He said his major task was to train me on the formation of a real underground movement and not another silly Rivonia. He again gave me 2 weeks to go and think it over. No, I followed him when he left, but he soon lost his trail amongst the pedestrians. Our last meeting in 1968 was at the entrance of Shakespeare House, where he picked me up at 8 p.m. with number 1, whom I introduced to an illiterate tribesman from the Transkei, who does my gardening sometimes. I had just brought him along so that I could have some company. When I drove back to Orlando, number 1 played his part exceptionally. He did not hear a word of English and spoke with signs to him. I had also enlisted Desmond Blow's assistant in tracing Dr. Braun. Des followed us to the venue arranged by Miss Dr. Braun. The venue was dilapidated. It was a dilapidated flat in De La Reyes Street, Newlands. But we drove to Bryanston, Ranburg, Parktown North, where Mr. Braun took off Des near to the Zoo Lake. But Des also had also managed to take the number plates. So this is the Afrocentricity Bookman show. This is Brother Jegna. We are reading Winnie Mandela's 491 Days, prisoner number 132/69. The discussion was similar as before, except that on this occasion, I should name any figure of any figure of money I wanted, and if I wanted an account, it would be transferred to my account. If I wanted cash, I would get cash. He said his superiors are a bit more concerned about his slow progress with me, and they wanted results. He wanted me to commit myself about training. I told him he should give me time to find a job first, because I had just lost a job. I claimed it would be easier to meet him in town. He was very sorry to learn of my plight. He offered to get me a very good job on condition I kept quiet about it, as he would be taking a serious risk by doing so. He gave me a 20 rand pocket money and said I would hear from him. No, I sat right through this discussion, as quiet as ever. We were then driven back to town, where I picked up the car. The meeting, which was held at McHaney's house in December 68, was to report the above affair. I remember this because the meeting place before the leaflet distributed on the 16th of December, and this money was given to me by Dr. Braun. Is the money I used for buying my sister a ticket to Umtata. Our money was finished. We each financed our own trips to the areas of distribution. As I was unemployed, I kept my money from Dr. Braun. There was no discussion about following up a power station in Makaike's house. The last time I saw Dr. Braun was when he called at 10 p.m. one January night at my house. He was dressed as an African clergy with one long black and white robes. He came to make an appointment with me to start training. He was carrying a Bible and an hymn book. When he walked out, he forgot the Bible. We both turned to fetch it. When he was picking up the Bible and fell, as he was bending over to pick it up, I saw a revolver on the left side under his robes, which opened up in the process. And I said to him, I noticed God is not enough protection in Mandela's house. He laughed and said, "This is my baby brother." All this is reported to Paul Joseph. Dr. Braun gave me the name of the person in Lesotho with whom I could check his credentials. Later, number 6 brought to me A crossed out name brought to me someone who had desperately wanted to see him. We gave number 6 some names of contacts. This student was in the West German group of students on an exchange program. I did not use these contacts. I was interrogated on this German Dr. Braun for 3 days and 3 nights continuously, although the SBs had all this information from number 1, who was interrogated before me, plus Sikasana and the others. Maud was already waiting for me and gave me a letter which she told me she had received some time back, but because she was busy with the Florida supermarket, she kept postponing telephoning as we drove back. This was a letter from number 20 in which she was giving a report of the distribution of Amtata. In the same letter, he also said that he wanted to see someone from our end soon to pass on certain valuable information he claimed to be in possession of. He mentioned that the SPs, this is a secret branch or a special branch, they mentioned that the SPs were very busy in the Port St. John coast and that they were said to be looking for one Makiwena, whom they say were just about to find. Number 20 believed that Makiwena is to be vitally linked with our freedom fighters. The day after receiving number 20's letter, I sent Sikosana to pick up number 1, 2, and 4. I met them at my house, the front room. I read to them the letter from number 20. I complimented number 20 for being conscientious and remarked about the fact that we just heard it from PE. I also said that we should raise fear for someone to go down and visit our contact, meaning number 20. On this day, the subject of positive action cropped up again. I do not remember how it started, but someone said, "What is the use of having such militant people like your contact, as he will soon tell he wants to do positive action, and we will discourage him." I knew that this was directed at my attitude towards single acts of violence. I said, "Gentlemen, go and read Rivionia Unmasked." No one who had read that book can make comments about such as these. Swampole recited my words just as I reproduced them. He maintained this statement was a communist bluff, that I was functioning with another group who did not want these men to take the glory out of positive action. So what you can see here is that when he's being questioned by the special branch, he's like they've got details of all this stuff. Places must have been bugged, a lot of these people must have been informers. So even though Winnie and ANC people were working on their liberation, different secret actions they was carrying out, it seems like the special branch had great amount of information on this stuff. In the discussion, I again repeated that acts of sabotage would have to be committed nationally by trained people. I even said, even if it means something like setting fire to the Afrikaners farmer mealie fields all over the country, we would achieve something better than blowing up a telephone box, which would take 5 minutes to repair, and went on to say that this means trained manpower. In the end, they saw my point of view. They stood up to leave. When Sikosana was on the door, the other 3 were behind, number 2 laughingly. "Well then, get me 500 men, you'll see. I do not care whether I will be killed in the process, and I will go to this man who is going to teach me bombs." We all laughed. Number 1 said, "And I will also burn all the cars in Joburg." Number 2 said, "Oh, never support such nonsense." They left. Sikosama was roaring with laughter. Almost a week after this informal discussion on number 20's letter at my house, I spoke to number 3 about a trip Charlotte Masinga intended undertaking during the long Easter weekend. Charlotte Masinga had been described already in these notes. She was more or less a member of my family. She had all her meals in my house, bathed her children and herself in my house. She only went home to sleep, and on most occasions she slept in my house. Whenever I went out to a meeting at night, I left her in my house with my niece, Olive. She had to wait until I returned, and she didn't know where I used to go to. I used to tell her when to expect me. She was known to my parents because I was nursed by her and her sister-in-law whenever I was ill. They often spoke to me over the phone, and they were desirous to meet her. She asked me to organize a car for her to go to my home. She was prepared to finance the trip. She had met with my father once, and as our so-called Minister of Agriculture in Umata and my father invited her home, I suggested to number 2 and 1 that the person who had to visit number 20 should go along in the same car. We decided to collect the fare. Father Akeli came as we were still talking. I left the 2 for a while and spoke with the father. He left me soon. I joined him again. I told number 2 that I had been wanting to ask him for a long time who was his expert on bomb making. But I had not wanted to discuss this in the presence of many people. He was hesitant for a long time. Then he gave me the name, Kasago. I then asked him if this was not the same person who had been giving evidence against some of our people who were serving long prison sentences, imprisonment on Robben Island, and he said yes. Both number 1 and number 4 were shocked by this. I asked him how could possibly approach a man who was a state witness, knowing fully well that most of them end up to be special branch informers. He said it did not matter because this man would sell only him. I told him that he forget anything he did affected to the activists. I told him he forgot that anything he did affected all the activists who were actively involved with him. He said that he did not realize the danger. Then I told him to go and withdraw the request for assistance from this man and to try and find another way of pretending it was a joke. He said he would definitely do so. So another chapter. What I learned under interrogation in relation to the above. A statement was brought to me but was held at a distance. It was a statement made by number 2, either in 1963 or 64, in connection with the explosives in his garage. These were dug out of the floor of the garage, and then the man Kasago was involved. Under interrogation, the police were trying to connect number 2 and 3, Max Keika and Kasago, with number 2's trip to Max Keika in Carltonville to find explosives. It is possible that Kasago may be a surprise witness to collaborate Max Keika's false evidence. The notes on Max Keika already submitted were fully detailed. There is nothing to be added. On more than one occasion, Major Swampole indicated to me that they were most annoyed about the nonsense of this right English gentleman who was supposed to have financed the SWA case. He also said to me that I must remember that the contrary to what I think about my friends in South Africa, have been quite a nuisance to certain people and certain organisations abroad because of my frank criticism and my being too outspoken towards certain leaders who are leading wonderful lives in the most lavish hotels abroad. It was in the interest too that I should be silenced. He said that freedom fighters who were used to the first two incursions in August 1962 were troublemakers in a training camp who had to be got rid of by the leadership. He also suggested that if I could broadcast a statement against the communists, there would be no trial. We would all be freed. He asked me why many banned people were working and not hindered by any way by the police. He said that I must watch out and see who will be right. He was convinced that no funds will be forthcoming for Winnie Mandela because there is no certain people who are convinced that I am worth wasting that money on. In the same way, my husband was better behind bars. He and Major Coetzee, which is a good South African network, got a good Boer name, Coetzee, told me that they would like to show goodwill to the African people. Right. Like to show goodwill to African people. But releasing the women, for instance, who are involved in this trial would hardly be expected to them if the case was not conducted as a form of political propaganda, as had been done in the past by English-speaking attorneys who have had no particular interest in us, but mostly for us as long as it perpetuates racial hatred. Major Swampel said, for as long as there are trials and incursions, they would never recommend such a release. But if they only kept quiet, like Mrs. Sobukwe, we would have our husbands back. But if only my husband would, if only my husband would promise to be neutral. One day I should know, however, that this is the end of me in the urban setting of Johannesburg. They will recommend that I should be repatriated if and when I leave prison. I must also mention that when Mr. Levin came to see me in the cells on the date of the trial, he informed me that Mrs. K had decided to pay for our defence since I refused government money. I told him that I could not go against my husband's wishes, and that I'd be defended by Mr. Carlson. My husband and I have been banned from communicating with others because, according to Brigadier Ocamp, they quarrelled the last time he saw them when my husband demanded to see Mr. Brown or Mr. Carlson. After our appearance in court on the 28th of October, Brig Ocamp called me to the office and told me that he would be visiting the island and he would grant me permission to meet with my husband. I asked him for permission to see Maud, and he told me that there are so many things that I didn't understand as a result of the confusion which had arisen, and since she was present in court, I assumed she was not a state witness. Brig Ocamp told me the matter would have to be discussed by the police first, and that he will let me know the following day what there is. Today is the 16th of November, and I've not heard from him. Swampole was furious over the use of the Afrikaner newspaper, over their use of letterheads and leaflets. Right through the interrogation, he kept saying, even the communists have never played this one on us. Winnie Mandela, and it is a good one, but your fun has not lasted. He also said, I am shocked to learn a woman drew such a document. Yes, I must compliment you because your work is organized, or is original, unlike them, whose speeches were drawn up by Ruth First, that bitch who has been thrown out of the African independent states. He later referred to number 3 as the woman with the strange organization powers, who within a year had the whole police force running all over the country. He sarcastically wanted to know, what do you do with all your friends, especially your men, who all end up dating, doing your wishes? My apologies, this light here. I leave us inheritance before your heart stops. My view is that the police would have arrested us on the spot and prevented the distribution of all these inflammatory leaflets, since number 9 and myself were banned. It would have even been better or even more dramatic to arrest them, for them to arrest us there and then. In June 1969, whilst I was still under interrogation, Major Coetzee of Johannesburg told me that Mr. Zwartenstein would appear for me and others if I should be charged, because Mr. Bezos no longer wanted to appear for me, as he had lost interest in political race cases. Coetzee further went on to say Mr. Zwartenstein is one of the greatest advocates in the country, and that he was once listed, but the police recommended the removal of his name from the list of the communists because he is such a good man. This recommendation is supposed to have been made by Ludl. During the 3rd week of October 1969, I was taken to the Compol building again, and Sompol said to me, Winnie, my favorite freedom fighter, I do not want you to be defended by that Bezos, Sogot, Cooney crowd. Then there will be no conviction. Is that your deal? My experience with this type of mentality is that silence is the best weapon. I simply kept quiet and could not waste any time replying to this trash. So that was the end of chapter 8. And we are virtually at the end of the show now. So it's a bit tricky here, this reading here. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of people. Winnie Mandela is being questioned by the special branch. And then they've got to obviously listen to what the police say to them, and obviously the magistrates, everybody else. So Winnie Mandela is meeting with ANC. They're working out what they should do to fight this apartheid system. Should they use explosives? Should they be trained? It seems like there's some Europeans that are coming to them to help them to train them. Germans. I'm not quite sure who these people are. But it seems like when they're being questioned, it seems like the special branch have got information on all these happenings. But Winnie Mandela is very strong. Sometimes she stays silent. Sometimes she'll speak when she need to. Sometimes she'll listen. But the thing is, at this time, you never know who to trust. Just like you see within the USA and Edgar Hoover. Even from Marcus Garvey time, he had people infiltrate his organizations, the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X. Unfortunately, depending on the people he thought he could trust were infiltrated, were just planted by these people. And we see the same thing in South Africa as well. Sometimes when he's speaking to people, but you can see she's unsure who you can trust. People will smile at you, as you know, or double dealing, yeah? Sometimes under pressure, sometimes maybe these people just decide to collaborate because that's what they felt better to do. So it's a very situation, yeah. But we will continue chapter 9 from next week, which is called The Attitude of the Interrogators, yeah. So go on. So this is the first time I'm reading this book myself. So we are reading 491 Days, prisoner number 1323/69, the Winnie Madikizela Mandela. So it's really the story of her imprisonment. For over a year she was in prison, and they questioned her. She was in solitary confinement. Sometimes they stripped her naked. It was all forms of torture what they did to her, but she never broke, which is a key thing. Even though internally sometimes she felt like breaking. One time she wanted to commit suicide, as you probably saw earlier, but she kept on fighting. So we'll continue with this book, okay? So this is the Afrocentricity Bookman show. We'll be back again next week, every Sunday between 4 and 6. Please remember that what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. And what we think of ourselves depends on what we know about ourselves. And what we know about ourselves depends on what we're being taught about ourselves. So as you know, no matter if we're in the Caribbean, whether we're in Africa, no matter where we are, if we get this Western education system, the system is designed to empower the Western people and to make us subservient, enslaved, incarcerate minds in all these kind of Western ideals, Western worldview. So we look at the world through the eyes of other people, yeah? It's very important that we do not look for the eyes of other people at all, yeah? As an Afrocentrist, this is the last thing that we must do. We must always see the world through our own eyes. So Afrocentricity, I must say, is a belief in the centrality of African culture, of African history, of our African mythology, our creative motives, and our ethos. All these things is our collective will. So it's very important that we study every thought, every action, every behavior, every value, everything we come into contact with. And if it's contradictory to African culture, African history, to our benefit, we must throw it away. We must dump it, yeah, straight away. It's no good for us to have anything which is contradictory to our revolution, to our rise, yeah, without apology. Afrocentricity attacks the falsification of truth. Unfortunately, when we adopt the beliefs and history given to us by our oppressors, it's full of falsehood. And if we believe this, we're allowing this falsehood to run our lives. So, but Afrocentricity attacks the falsification of truth and false attitudes of self-hatred that have oppressed great many of our people for far too long. So the Afrocentricity Bookman show is really entailed to get rid of this sort of thing, because we do have a very bad view of ourselves as a community and as individuals, because we're in this kind of Western paradigm. We must break free from the Western paradigm and adopt Afrocentricity so we can see the world for what it is. Maybe we can see the world for the first time. We can see reality. We see I'm sure you're all familiar with the film The Matrix, that there is a world that people believe, and it's a false world. There is a false world out there, people, okay? And when you can only see the real world when you break away from Eurocentrism and adopt Afrocentricity, because then you begin to see your worldview. You begin to see the culture. You will see books. You read them differently. When you watch movies, you analyze these movies differently, because now you can see truth. You can deal with truth. You can see the reality for what it really is, okay? So I'll be back with you again next Sunday. We'll continue reading Winnie Mandela's book, 491 Days. This is Brother Jegna. Hope you enjoyed today's show. It's a bit tricky, some of the discussions there, but you can see she's been in prison now for the best part of a year, and they just keep on questioning her, but they've got so much information. They tried to break her, but African women are far too strong to be broken by these people, okay? So this is Brother Jegna tuning out. You have a great week, and I'll catch you next week. Remember, tell your friends about it, between 4 and 6 every Sunday, yeah? So you just take care. Yeah, one love.
I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that.
Wake up, people, wake up, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up now, wake up. Wake up, people, wake up, wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Listen, Father God, in your name I pray, help the people.